saw is that kids were being sidelined. They were pretending to engage, but weren't absorbing content. They were taking homework home at night, and it was meaningless for them. They had no access to the curriculum, right? And even though you've got the best E&L teachers really trying to gather instructions, right? So we had to step back and say, so what are their fundamental needs? If we look at the profiles, what are their fundamental needs? So one thing we know is that the curriculum we built needed to teach foundational literacy so students develop the skills to use text as a resource to learn. And that is even true of Jorge, though much less so than Sandar. What's also true, this is mine. There it is. That they need to build conceptual knowledge, right? To support them to access high school and middle school content, right? What are all the kinds of content knowledge that we take for granted when kids come into the secondary level, right? So, for instance, Sandar might know how to grow crops, right? But she has nothing, she has no conceptual framework around photosynthesis, for example, right? That would be an example. And then explicitly develop the academic thinking, language, and literacy that they need to gain the competence in these domains. So those are the kinds of abstract or academic skills that we inculcate over, let's say, how many? 5 to 8 years of schooling, right? So in secondary schools, what are we assuming? We're assuming that students have had 5 to 8 years of schooling. We're assuming that students have developed foundational literacy skills that can be transferred to learning a new language, right? What are our assumptions? What's our context? Because if we can't examine that, there's no way we can serve these students. What are we assuming? That they're bringing literacy skills in home language they need to use to attack text and use it as a resource to learn, to build new knowledge, right? That's the big shift, right? We're building knowledge through text, right? We might say, I've said this before, but we can teach them to build knowledge, but not use text, right? Give me a kid in 4 years, I can teach them global history, I can teach them, American history, but I'm not so good at actually teaching them to read and write. Is that okay? We may not have the skills at the secondary level, but it's not okay. And that students have exposure to the foundational concepts and big ideas that are valued in the content ethics, right? So we think, hey, you're coming from Turkey or you're coming from Germany, you've got a basis of these academic concepts, right? Which these kids aren't bringing. So these are our assumptions, and these are what we think are going to fill the gap, right? And am I telling you that Sandar is going to move inside of a year to be able to participate in 9th grade? No. We know that, right? But what I'm telling you is that with targeted instruction, and Rebecca was talking to me about a case in Lackawanna this morning, that kids are going to have a chance, right? Somebody like Sandar is going to have a chance. And again, just sort of to emphasize, we already discussed this, but what we're talking about is kids that run the spectrum, right? This is a subgroup. They're not all the same, right? Their needs are diverse in spite of the fact that I'm classifying them as this subgroup. Okay, so again, I made this speech already, right? Bridges is for kids with home language literacy at or below grade 3, right? It is not for kids who have home language literacy above grade 4. So Adele came up to me and she said, so how do we know, right? They speak Bangla, they speak Karen, they speak Arabic, in the Yemeni dialect. So how are we supposed to know on the ground whether their literacy is at 3rd grade or below, right? So for many years, we built our homegrown assessments. Were they great? No. Were they serviceable? Yes. What were we looking for, do kids, can they find their country on a map? Do their letters all run together so they don't have any print concepts? Basic, but it told us very little in terms of data about the students. So now I'm going to do let's talk about our context, right? So our context is NICED. I want to just sort of situate Bridges in the context of NICED. So Bridges is sort of a part of a larger sort of programmatic model, right? So what came out in the last 4 or 5 years is the Blueprint for for ELS. These are principles about ELS more generally, true of LL Psych as well. Then CR Part 154, right, that said that all students deserve access to ELA content, right? That caused some problems on the ground. It's not perfect, but do I believe in that fundamentally? Yes. Does the Bridges curriculum, is it built to ensure that students have access to ELA concepts as well as language development? Yes, right? And then they've built, which they just released, a structure for intake and identification. So what Adele wants to talk about is, we've got the NYSESLAT, right? You want to put LL Psych in front of the NYSESLAT, what kind of data are you going to get? Nothing. No relevant data, right? They're going to tell you that they're entering. But are LL Psych the same kind of entering as a kid who just came from Turkey and has grade level literacy? Right? You're talking about two different populations here. So this is going to only tell you that kids are entering, right? The multilingual psych screener. How many people are conscious or aware of that in this room? Okay, a little bit. So the multilingual psych screener is a assessment that maybe I have no slides on that page. Not yet. Okay, an assessment that's available in 9 languages. Not every language you want, and sorry, Allison, not to you. Because New York State paid for it, right? So it, unfortunately, you know, I've said to foundation people, you want to do something about the psych population in the United States? You develop a home language literacy screener that is available across the country. Then we're going to have an impact on psych. But right now, maybe this is the only state that has this. Maybe there's one more. I'm not aware of another state that has this. And is it perfect? No. But it is a strong beginning. And you're fortunate to be in a circumstance where you can actually have a stab at understanding the home language literacy of your students when they walk in the door, right? And we've been able to do that in Spanish for a long time, but we haven't been able to do that in other languages. So I didn't put the languages up here, but I'm going to read them, just because I know a number of you are going to say, yeah, but that's not the languages my kids speak. Okay, so it's in, right now, it's in Arabic, Bangla, Chinese, but I don't know if it's in Cantonese or Mandarin, English, Haitian Creole, Mai Mai, which is a Somali dialect, and you can pronounce it better than me, but Ska Karen, which is one of the dialects of Karenni, that, and Buffalo has been a place where many Karenni students have immigrated. A big miss for the state in general was Nepali, so I think they're trying to deal with that, but they haven't yet. So those are your 9 languages. That was released by the state. It's on their website, and it's something that I really highly recommend you start to play with and practice now, because when you hit the ground in September, you're going to be wanting to use this tool efficiently and effectively, right? Mario, you know, because he's a data hog.
Annie,
Yes.
just so everyone in Buffalo is aware, we use this at central registration. It's not
Yes.
independently by building.
Right, so that's important actually to know. It's not for New York City.
Is this being used currently in placement?
Just started,
Okay.
and Purdue is working really hard to get an upload feature on Infinite Campus.
Yeah.
So whatever assessment are done in Infinite Campus, we'll upload it so you can have it as a PDF.
Perfect.
And there's a new L data tab for additional data.
Great, thank you.
Can I steal this for a second? So I just want to point out one thing. Let me get that one. That Mario noticed, because he's been working with data for a long time. So if you look at our 3 LL Psych students and their scores on the NLS, just want to point out that they all have the same score, right? So although this is a radically important tool, right, at your fingertips, all it's going to tell you about Bridges students is they're Bridges students, right? It's going to tell you that their literacy is below 3rd grade in home language, but it's not going to distinguish a Sandar from a Jorge, okay? And that's important to know because nobody says that in the instructions, right? You have to learn that because it keeps spitting out reading level 2, reading level 2, reading level 2, right? No matter which student you have below 3rd grade. So it doesn't assess students below 3rd grade in home language, high 3rd grade, really. So that's good because you know they're a Bridges student. But then you've got, and we're gonna talk about this a little later, then you've got to do some more homegrown assessment of who this student actually is as a literate person. Okay, so Adele, that's the answer to your question. And if you don't, if the languages for which this was built isn't one of the languages of your population, then you're gonna have to be innovators on the ground. And there are resources out there. This is what we did to begin with. But you can tell a lot if you can get a prompt translated and ask a kid to write about that prompt. You can tell a lot, even if it's a language you don't read, right? But again, that's where also sort of, having, we call them paras, but having them people in the classroom who are language speakers of those language communities can be really powerful. Okay, the other just point I want to make, I don't want to lecture at you for too long, but again, I want to say, so we're in a context. What are the other resources, right? The bilingual progressions, right? So New York State went to lengths to create the bilingual progressions, right? Right here. And they also hired Diane August to look at the curricula on Engage and think about what appropriate scaffolds were for L's. Those are amazing resources. But what do they assume? Yes, exactly. They assume that students have literacy in their home language. So even at this entering level, they're saying kids can use they can use text in home language. But what if kids don't read and write in home language? That's not a scaffold, right? If they don't have the literacy and the academic skills, the progressions aren't an appropriate scaffold. So what we're saying is that these kids are a subcategory that fall below entering. And I say all this just because I want you to know we've thought about where we situate ourselves in the New York State context. So when you're thinking about, yeah, but they're telling me to use the progressions, or they're telling me to use the engaged curricula, right, with these scaffolds, why it's not appropriate for this subpopulation. Okay. All right. Okay, so now I want to go back to our claim that the sort of pillars that these students need are foundational literacy, academic literacy, and conceptual knowledge, right? So I used to do this training and say, okay, that's what they need. And then I'd move along and share our curriculum. But I realized sort of with our team, it's like, oh, do we have a shared understanding of what those concepts or ideas are, right? Do I as a high school teacher really know what foundational literacy is? What do I mean when I'm talking about academic literacy? And what's conceptual knowledge and how is it different from content knowledge? So what I want you to do now is on your tables, I left these two. So I left these two things, right? These are your categories, right? So you're going to put out your categories, and then you're going to read these little examples, and you're going to decide, you're going to do a category match. If I say being literate in the subject area involves seeing how ideas link with a broader framework, what is that an example of? All right, and you can work, so I left 2 on some tables and 3 on others, so it'll either be groups of 2 or 3. But take a minute to read through these,